Okay, so it's about 11:13. Again, nobody showed up. Nobody has still taken Chapter 3 or Chapter 4 tests, other than I think Bonds. We'll talk a little bit today about Lab 32514. Again, so if you ever get your Raspberry Pis down the road or something, maybe you can always go back and look at this and figure out how to use it. Otherwise, there's still no excuse for not doing the packet tracers in Chapter 3 or Chapter 4. Also in Chapter 3, there's this section here, 325, about the Python coding. And again, there's a couple of labs that go with this. And maybe some of you have done them, maybe you have not. But just writing some simple Python scripts and using a text editor to do it. So those are some things that you could also be working on. What I want to talk about today is this lab, which is interacting with the physical world from the Webex team. So in the previous lab, 32513, we set up a Webex room, and we also used Postman to interact with it. So what we're going to do here is use our some code to interact with our Raspberry Pi, which will then send a message to the Webex team that we set up. So over here on the right, you can see I got a bunch of Webex teams. And I'm going to use this one called General, which is actually the Cisco One group, the one that we set up at the beginning of last year. And as you can see, I've kind of been playing around with it. I typed in some messages already, and we'll talk about what this particular message means and what this message does, because that's basically how we're interacting through the Raspberry Pi with this application. So and how this application is going to interact with the Raspberry Pi. So think of this as sort of being maybe like your Alexa or your Siri, and give it a command, and then it would actually send that command to something like when you say turn on TV or turn on radio, that would be like the Raspberry Pi. Well, what we're going to turn on is a light. So we're going to send a message from the Webex team, through the interweb to the Raspberry Pi, which is then going to turn this light on. And again, that light representing whatever it is that you want to interact with. One change that I did make, probably nobody will really notice, but when it talks about setting it up, it talks about using this pin and this pin. So I want to use, it talks about using this pin and this pin. But when I did on the Raspberry Pi, because I've been keeping other things connected to the Raspberry Pi and just using different pins in different places on my board. Anyway, I had to go down and I actually used this pin just to kind of separate the two. So that was one change. You might, if anybody would notice that in the code. We can go from there. Right? All right. So once we set that up, we have to do a couple of things to get things organized. We have to again turn the Raspberry Pi and tell it, hey, which one of these pin codes are we using? And this is where I made the change. Originally, I think this was pin 17. Right. So that's the one that we're interacting with the LED. So I have to run that code to kind of set things up to make sure he knows what we're using and what pins I'm using. And then this is just a little bit of code just to test it, to see if it actually works. So when I run this code, I should actually see on my Raspberry Pi, which I am right now, the light going on and off. And we're doing it, remember, for a range of 5. So, you know, on and off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a loop, an iterative loop, done a specific number of times. All right, so all that's working. So we know the physical's working. Now we want to start dealing with the WebEx. And if you remember from the last lab, we need a key in order for this to work. So in the WebEx developer page, and we go to rooms, and we go to the Spark room, we have this personal access token. So that's what we had to copy and paste in here. And we store that in a variable called, the API authorization key. So that's what's going to, when we go back and forth, automatically, like instead of me having to type in username and password or whatever, it's like registering my device with them. So that's stored in there. Okay? And you may have to go back and redo some of that because, remember, these only last for like 12 hours or something. So you down the road or we're doing this lab, you may have to update that. All right, so we have to import some libraries. And the biggest one that we have to import is this one called requests, because that is what we are going to use to interact. It's basically an HTTP code, and it, get, put, all those things that we talked about. It's all kind of already built in for us. So you'll see in the code down below after I run this to import those things. I can just say, look, it's already, I want to use the requests, and I want to do a get request, and I'm going to go to this API right here, which is all this stuff over here, and I want to go to that room and with my choice. And here's my authorization. Here's my key. So rather than trying to, paste all this in the code, we just use the variable. And if everything is cool, remember we're going to get a 200. If it's not a 200, then something happened. So we run this, and I don't get a message, so that means everything is cool. All right, so then we're going to use JavaScript. And JavaScript dump is just, again, a function that's already written called dumps. It'll basically just go in there and grab everything. So I create a variable, r.json. I'm going to store it in JSON data. So anything that this gives me, I'm going to put in this variable. And then I'm going to dump it out. Well, when I run that code, what I get down here below, I'd run this previously. So, you would have this, if this is the first time you're doing it. Then after you run the code, it basically dumps out all the information that is over here in the WebEx team. So these are the groups that we created. There's Sparkman, API, Postman. There's Netacad, which is over here. So all the different groups are now dumped out with all their other information. This is what team they're on, and what, whether they're a group or a person, those kind of things. So kind of interesting when I was playing around with this morning. I actually went back to a team that I was on and was just trying to do some tests to see if I get it to work, because I wanted something with messages in it, and I didn't know that this was still active. And so I got a nice message back from Miss Alderson, who I've known for a lot of years. She's actually the Networking Academy, like basically in charge of the whole North and North America, South America, Europe. She's a big wig now. She was just a regular person when I first knew her. But I thought that was kind of funny. I didn't realize that was still there. So that's why I went and I went to use this one. So all this code does is we create a variable, R up here, which basically went and got or gets, all the information. So then I said, all right, take that information, and with the JavaScript, and put it all into this variable data, and then dump it out. So it's dumping all the JSON data, which we got from up here. All right, so once we do that, that's a lot of information, a lot of things to go through. I can also play around with the code and not, make it look a little bit easier to read. So I take that same RJSON that we created, up above, and I just say, look, I don't want to see all of the stuff. I just want to see, certain items. What items do I want to see? Well, I want to see, room and ID. Because if it's a legitimate room, listed there, it has an ID. So I don't want to see all of this stuff. I just basically want to see, what is the room, and here is the ID. And I run the code again for room in rooms. So rooms is the number of data. So as long as there is something in there, I'm going to print it out, and I'm going to call it, basically room. That's why we use room down here. So these are the plurals. This is all of it, right? And as long as there is something in there, I'm going to take the first one, put it in room, print it out, do another loop, until I get all the way down to the bottom here. And then the loop will stop. So when I run that code, there it is again. Again, if you're running this for the first time, you won't have anything there. But it gives me a list of all the things that are over there on the left. So then what I want to do is I want to say, okay, here's all my rooms. I want to go to a specific room. So I picked the Cisco One group 1819, which is this one. I need two things. I need the name and I need the ID, because like when I come over here, I have to make sure I got all these rooms. I want to make sure I go into the right room. So I type in the name of the room, and there's my, code I'm using to create this R, which is all the stuff in the different rooms. And I'm going to go through and search here, though, whereas before up here I was printing them all out. Down here I'm going to do sort of the same thing. I'm going to do this loop, but what I'm looking for is if the room title matches room name to search, which is up here. So I'm just going to go through and until I find a match. Once I find a match, I'll print it out and get out of, get out of the loop. If I don't find a match for some reason, I'll get a message. I'll just say, hey, couldn't find a room with that name. So when I run this, found rooms with the word, that came from here. And then it printed out. It says, okay, we'll print the room name, the room title, and the ID. So there's the room name. There's the ID. Because we're going to need this ID in a minute. That's how, when we interact, I know to, when I type something here and I come back to my code, that's what's going to make the link. So verify that the room ID message contains a valid room ID. So when we did this up here, we got the room ID message, right, which we put in here. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one, up here. As we were going through the loop, when I did get a match, stored that in a thing called room ID message. Basically right here, in other words, instead of trying to pick it out of here, I'm just going to print it again here. There it is. There's the room ID. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm going to go and see, like, well, what messages, are already in there. I have to do a little bit of setup. So here's my room ID message. That is this big, long thing up here. That's what I'm going to use. I'm only going to do up to 8 messages, because if I had like 100 messages, I want to print out 100. And I'm going to use the requests again. So I'm going to go back to the rooms. Only this time I'm going to get the messages. So back in here, I'm going to actually use messages here. So I'm actually going to use this API right here to list the messages. So I'm going to run this code. And I'm getting the messages, hopefully, from that area. Notice I didn't get any error message, but I also didn't get anything printed out, because you see there's no print in here. It just said, hey, get me all the messages stored in a variable called R, right here. So R has all that information. Well, now I need to interact with it using the JavaScript code. So again, we go back, and I'm going to take all that information from R, in terms of JSON code, stick it all in a place called JSON data, and then I'm going to dump it out. So when I dump it out, here are all the last 8 messages. So if we look at the bottom right here, I can see that here's the ID of the person that sent it. Here's the ID of the room. Here's the text right here, try again. And try again, which is right here. And then I have other messages, there's turn on, capital T, there's turn on, the lowercase t, which is right here. Where are the other ones here? So there's turn on, and then there's turn on with a backslash. We'll talk about what that does, because that's actually how we're going to turn on the light and turn the light off. So there's the turn off. Over here. So I get, I'm actually just getting all that information. I can see who sent the message. I can see when the message was created. All of that stuff just comes from here. I just dump it out. But again, we want to see how we're going to work with this, because the way this works is when you type in \turn on, you'll see that message in the Webex, and it will turn the light on. But it has to have the \, because it has to that's just a special character to, you can make it whatever you want in the code, but just to designate that, hey, this is a command, not a comment. So like you would just come down here and change it, make it whatever you want. But as long as it matches that, then what's going to happen is it's going to turn the light on. And it's going to store that stuff, in a message. So if I run this, it's going to say, well, yeah, I found a command, turn off. Because it's in there. And I think that was the last message. So that's the one, that popped up. All right. So that kind of verifies that, it works. In other words, like I'm seeing these things in there. So what did we get to the final part here? And this is the actual command where we're going to turn stuff on and off. So this is going to go through and interact. It's going to get messages from the Webex, going to store them, and we're going to, use that API I talked about a minute ago. Here's our authorization key for the room that we're going to. We're requesting the information from there. We're going to store it again, and it's going to get into, if the last message, if there's no new message, it's going to print no new message. If there is a new message, it'll say, hey, there's a new message, and here, here's what it is. So that's what all this stuff is down here. If I start this code, scroll down here, it's just going to kind of keep looking, and it's kind of constantly keeping watch of what's going on over in the Cisco group. So if I type in, if you can look to the left, and I type in a new message, and hit enter, it will show up right here. Let me get my fancy little drawing thing. It shows up right here. So it's sort of like, Alexa listening in the room. It hears its name, or actually maybe it's already activated, but it's interacting. So here I'm typing something in on the Webex team, and the Raspberry Pi, which is connected to it as a device, is saying what's going on there. So if I wanted to say, like, how like when we say, hey Siri or hey Alexa, well, for us, that would be like \turn on. That's my Alexa in the background. When I type in turn on, it's there. And again, it shows up right there. And if you could see my breadboard, you would now see the light is on. In other words, she's listening. Well, then I could type another message. I'm back. I had to answer that phone. So the light is on. If I want to interact over here and I want to turn the light off, backslash turn off, and I send that message, and hopefully we will get a link telling us that the message is on. My light is off, and we scroll down. We're going to hit our limit here on our messages. Just to show, let me rerun this, and it's going. I'm going to type turn on again. And thing is not running right. No, that's not running. So new message, turn on. So there it is, my light is on. And if I type in turn off, there's the new message and my light is off. All right, so that's the lab that's kind of interacting back and forth with what's going on in Webex. So lastly, in this reflection, it says, well, update the code in the electrical circuit to be able not only to control the physical world from Webex, but also sense. So in that case, you could ask like Webex, what is the temperature? So think of this, over here on the left, like, hey, turn on, hey Alexa or hey Siri, they're on, right? And then my Alexa in the background says they can't respond. And then you ask it a question, right? Like, what's the temperature? So it has to come from somewhere. And now in that case, it doesn't necessarily come from an actual sensor. There's another API that it connects to and tells you the outside temperature. If you want to know your inside temperature, it would interact with your thermostat. But in here, we have, you could have a sensor that would tell the temperature of your room, or have the, and it would report back. Now, it would actually send the message back to Webex. Now, in order to do that, like, we have these different commands in here with the API where, we're using this particular API to get the messages. And that actually is here. But we were doing that to get a message, to list a message. If I wanted to post a new message, like, where it would report back to Webex based on what it read in the probe for the temperature back to Webex, and it would say like, well, okay, here's the, here's the temperature if I want it to show up there. So I would need the room ID. So I would paste in the room ID that we got, remember, previously, and I could say, the temp is 68. In this case, to test it, I can come down here and run it and go back to my Webex team, and there's the message. So you'd have to play around in the loop where we're looking for like a particular message. So if the message text equaled, hey, what's the temperature? It would have to then, instead of turning on a pin, get some kind of output back from there. And there's other things, I don't think we have a temperature probe actually in our kits. There is one in the SparkFun kit, but it could just be anything. It could be like a button. How is the button on? Is the button off? And then, but instead of the message in here causing something to happen in the Raspberry Pi, something on the Raspberry Pi would cause something to happen in the Webex. So, I know we're not a programming class, but I do have just got another message on another Webex team. Everybody's all excited that I'm doing IoT course. So I have this in here. I know you probably can't read it, but I will try to post it with the video, and we will go from there. Talk to you later.